Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Giarmillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives and the work and the businesses of people in my network, connections that I've had for a while, new connections, expanding connections, just based on the series and my growing network. I consider these interviews, these conversations, great leads to books that make that kind of a difference in people's worlds and lives. So in this particular series, I cover three types of books. The first book where my guest is sharing a book with me that I haven't read. A second category of books where we've both covered the book or both read the book, whether specifically for that episode or we read it in our previous lives. And then the third category is the category of authors and publishers, those who have come on to discuss the book that they've put out there into the world, trying to share the message of what they want to share with this audience, with their target market, just to kind of give a flavor. I find, obviously, if you've heard this series before, just putting a voice and a tone to what a reader or an author wants to get behind that messaging of that book, it just makes all the difference. So for this particular episode, I will have a guest who is an author, and my guest today is Sabina Sulat. Sabina has worked in human resources and organizational development for the past 15 years. In 2018, Sabina found herself unemployed for the first time in her career and used that experience to write the book, Agile Unemployment, Your Guide to Thriving While Out of Work. She also hosts the Agile Unemployment podcast, the top unemployment podcast in the US. Her current work through her company, Reworking, focuses on helping others to build confidence and resilience as they navigate through all aspects of being out of work to find careers and jobs that align with their values and skills. So that's very timely for everything that's going on today. Sabina regularly speaks to groups and organizations to help others learn to take control of their careers and to help corporations take a human-first approach with their employees. This fall, Sabina will be taking part in the Beyond Lean In book tour, joining fellow female workplace authors for a series of events across the country as they share their knowledge and insights with others, regardless of gender. Sabina's second and yet untitled book will be released in the fall of 2023, tackling the topic of explaining how work works to those who are just starting their careers. And that's such a great topic because I think, Sabina, we go to college, we learn, we take tests, we write papers, so on and so forth. And I think many people may just see it as a stepping stone to getting a job, getting in the door. But that sounds great that you're writing this book about tackling the topic of really explaining how work works, like obviously I don't know the details of what you're writing, but it sounds interesting where it's kind of like the dynamics, the psychology of what that actually means for somebody. And before I kind of pick your brain on that, Sabina and I had met where she reached out, having heard about the series, wanting to discuss her book. We got to talking, had a conversation, got to know each other's work, podcast, everything that we bring of value to our clients and our network. So here she is joining me for that. And now, real quick, back to that upcoming book, Sabina. Is that kind of my understanding? Just kind of giving an introduction to really what that means.
Yeah, I think first of all, thank you so much for having me. I was really looking forward to this. You bring up a really good point. We're taught how to do a job, or maybe you learn about an industry. It could be something like, going to law school and learning how to be a lawyer, or an accountant, or a nurse, or a doctor, or teacher. But no one teaches you how work operates. And what I really mean by that is there's this thing called the employee engagement cycle that a lot of organizations have, and it's how they manage employees during different phases of an employee's tenure with the company. Like, there's a way to interact with them even before you hire someone. That's the attraction recruiting phase. And everybody has specific responsibilities in each phase, but no one ever tells the employee, oh, this is what you're supposed to do in this phase. And it will grade how you act during, say, the retention phase, which is where your performance, your development happens. No one pulls you aside and says, by the way, really key things like your money, your advancement, even your reputation are all crucial in this phase. And here are ways to leverage it to be successful. And Like, have you ever worked somewhere you notice there's that one person who like skyrockets to the top and you're like, but they're not the best at what they do. They're like, how
Okay.
are they getting that? I can
Yeah.
almost guarantee you that person consciously or unconsciously has mastered the employee engagement cycle, and they know how to build those relationships and how to leverage it for their career.
Yeah.
And I
What's
think it's,
interesting is
yeah,
is I don't think I think we come out of school thinking that if you work hardest,
yeah.
if you work short of burning out, that's going to show people how much you're worth and how valuable you are.
Can I say right now that's a big fat lie? And it is one of those things. I think it was probably ingrained by prior generations. My grandparents worked that way. My parents worked that way. And it's not that you shouldn't give 100% when you're at the job, but I think we are at this kind of great new stage of employment where the employee is in the driver's seat. I will argue that with anybody who wants to argue that with me. And it really is just a mental shift of realizing how valuable employees are. And I think at one point, workplaces really valued employees, and there are workplaces all over the globe that definitely show their appreciation. But it's your life, it's your career. You have to take ownership of it. You have to direct it because no one's going to hand you anything. And it doesn't take that much work. I think it's understanding where your value lies, how to leverage that, how to increase that, but also how to combine that and align that with what you really want in life and what's important to you. And those are key things, and that's a lot of what the second book is about.
Yeah. When I got out of college in what, 2000, um, it was essentially there's the career center, go get a resume, go online, monster.com at that point, and find a job. Whereas since that time, I've done a lot of volunteering at the University of Hartford, and there's, mock interviews, mock networking events. But even those don't go, I don't think there's anything included in education still that really speaks to what you're saying. Um,
We
Work life
teach,
balance or anything like that.
yeah,
If you use the wrong word or phrase, somebody's going to get lit up. But like work life balance,
yeah,
your own values, what's important to you. And I think so many of us went into our jobs with that mindset you're trying to avoid for your readers, where we just kind of work hard,
mhm,
hoping that somebody's going to notice, but not really putting ourselves in the position and packaging it in such a way that somebody notices. So there's a lot that you forfeit if you don't go into it with that focus you're talking about, right?
absolutely, absolutely. To your point, we teach students, and this is high school, college, grad school, really anyone starting their career. There are tons of resources that teach you how to get a job. Very few teach you how to actually manage your career, how to control it. And it again, it's you don't have to be, a corporate raider to do this. You can do this whatever job you have. It's really making sure that your job serves you, not the opposite way. And again, I think the pandemic was showing employees the value that they add. I had a client in the middle of a session who just kind of exclaimed, like, wait a minute, I'm the asset here in all of this. And I'm like, absolutely you are. I'm so proud that you've realized that. And you go into the workplace and you give 100%. You're given a paycheck. You control whether you want to stay late and work on a project. You set your boundaries, I guess is the best way of saying
Yeah.
that, rather than feeling beholden to do that. And I will say this, I've worked a lot with Gen Z in the second book. I love Gen Z. They are like asking for things we have wanted to ask for, but we're afraid to ask for so long. And I think we're going to see so much happen in the workplace in the next 10 years. I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, and what stands out to me is that just because somebody's realizing there's this growing self-awareness of how we need to focus for ourselves, go after things for ourselves, where we're the ones in control, that doesn't lessen or compromise any value that the organization gets. I mean, I would argue
Absolutely.
that it increases it because the person
Thank
is
you.
more self-aware of what value they hold, so they can give more value.
Well, they're happier. Happier people are more productive. They're better to be around. I think for a while it was starting to feel like this one-way street where I give and I give and I give. And yes, I get a paycheck, I get benefits, but I want to be seen as a person. I want to be valued for being unique and me. And instead of having to be like everyone else at work. And we now talk about things like psychological safety, and there's an expectation that my manager is going to coach me appropriately and things like that. Like, I get asked all the time, is it okay if I look for work while I have a job? My response is absolutely. But when you are at that job, you give 100%.
Mm.
There's none of this like short timer getting out attitude. If you're getting a paycheck, you give 100%. And, but you're also a free agent. In the US, HR folks lovingly call it, right to hire, right to fire, meaning no one is obligated here. Very few employees in the US are obligated. You need to have a contract, and you're usually at a very high level, or you do something so unique. But most of us are, right to hire, right to fire. So that goes both ways. Your company isn't obligated to keep a job for you. They don't have to tell you why they let you go. You can leave at any point in time as well. I mean, for the most part, that's how it works.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I dragged you right into the trenches to go into the topic right away, but let me
That's
take
okay.
a couple steps back.
Sure.
Yeah, I jumped into the future. Like, what are you going to be doing in the future with this book? All right,
That's very
now,
rare. Usually I like that though, because usually it's the opposite. And I'm given like a minute to talk about the new book that I still haven't titled at the end. So you've given me a nice allotment of time. So I appreciate that.
no, I just didn't know it was going to happen, but just went through what you want your next book to be about, and I just in working with students and being a coach, I just realized the value of that.
Hmm.
I've talked so much about being a student that we're given the information to regurgitate for tests, but we're not really given the right
Yeah.
coping skills. And I would argue, I mean, we refer to them as coping, like what are the skills that you're really using to survive? But I don't, you know, not to beat a dead horse, but I think there's a lot of value in those kind of skills where we're thinking about our thinking and how we're approaching something. But in any way, um, Sabina, why don't we start with who you are today? What's the work that you do with your clients? Can you give us a little taste of the different areas you're working in today, just to get a feel for who you are?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I have my company reworking, and I knew that I wanted to go and kind of work on my own. I love the work world. I just don't think I'm really well suited for it. So I love everything about work except
Work.
I don't like me personally. I
Yeah.
like working hard. I don't like going into a place of work. I think part of it is I'm not a political animal.
Hmm.
I don't do that well. I like most people, I get very focused in like what's important to me and my job. And it's very hard for me to see that what's the sun in my universe is like a distant star in someone else's. And so I'm doomed
That's
for
a great way to put
disappointment.
it. That's an amazing way to put it. Because
I
I've
wish
always
that
thought
was
about,
mine. It's not.
yeah, okay. But
It'll be
I've
a book
always,
title one day.
yeah, because I've always, when I've thought about why I don't like working in an office,
Yeah,
it always has come down to my priorities don't reconcile to someone else's priorities. Not
that's
that I
it.
think there's any less value to it, but
Exactly.
and we've seen so many people, and here's the thing, your priorities don't have to, and your values don't have to mirror mine. Um, but
Hmm.
if I think you're going in such a direction that it doesn't, it's just it can be very compromising, and you're left at the devices of someone else. You're left at the emotion of someone else.
Yeah.
great leaders, you don't find them too often. Everybody else is just kind of trying to survive, managing things. They bring in their ego, they bring in emotion, they bring in all these things. There's a lot of baggage in the workplace, let's be honest. So
Yeah.
if I'm going in with my values, my priorities, and trying to help something, and I see too much of that, it's like you're not able to tap into a great workforce if you have a lot of that. But in any case, go on. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I love these, I kinda love where all this conversation is going, but you're 100% right. We tell someone, "Okay, so this is your job, and it's really important, and I'm going to basically determine compensation, bonuses, advancement on how well you do at your job," and then you go into the workplace trying to launch a program or a project or get something done, and you're stalled because there's all these other things that no one talks to you about. And you're like, well, wait a minute. If you're not prioritizing my job, why should I?
Mm,
And it gives a very mixed signal to an employee. And yes, I'd had enough of that. And my last corporate gig, I was hired, and I give them credit. They told me as they were hiring me that the person who had conceived of the role and all of the expectation on it was leaving the company. And I thought, well, they're being very open and telling me this before I'm hired. That stands for integrity to me. That'll be great. But no one else cared. So that person left, and I had this role that no one really cared about as deeply. And it was not a great tenure for me. And that was kind of the deciding factor that maybe corporate life isn't meant for me. And so we'll go back to when I lost a prior role in 2018. I had what I thought was the dream job. I thought I had arrived. It had everything I wanted. It had title, compensation, I want a certain amount of cachet. I admit that. And I got in the dream job, and my thought was, okay, I'll work this job. It'll be my last corporate role. My retirement career or my next role will be on my own, where I will write and talk about the workplace and all things employment. I lost that job after 6 months. So for the first time ever, I was out of work, and nothing prepared me for it. So let's kind of take the conversation the opposite way. You and I were talking about everything we weren't prepared for in work, but then there's all this stuff you're not prepared for when you're not working. And
mm,
it was overwhelming with the administrative part because none of those entities talk to each other, but they're all tied together at a state level. There's not one website you can go to for all of your aid and so forth when you're out of work. You have to log on to all these different websites, and it can be overwhelming. You miss things. But above all else, nothing prepared me for the psychological impact of losing my job. Uh, I, I still think I'm really good at what I do. I still talk about things in HR and learning and development. But when you lose your job and someone says, you're not coming back here anymore to do this, you question yourself. And what's worse is we don't talk about those things. I think we're getting better, thanks, unfortunately, to the pandemic.
yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's now okay to go on LinkedIn and say, I'm looking for work. That was taboo 3 years ago.
Hmm.
Uh, Now we can do that, but we still don't talk about the more emotional impact being out of work has on your reputation, your psyche, your soul, your well-being. And when I was out of work for a year, which drove me crazy. I never thought it would have taken that long for me to get a job. And every time I had to do something different to take care of myself while unemployed, be it figure out how to get out of a financial bind, or figure out how to use a benefit that the state offered me, I'd always, kind of vent to my friends going, you know, why does no one teach you this? And then I would go to, I'm going to write a book. And when the pandemic hit and I no longer had a 3-hour commute, I'd gotten a job. It was a great job, but I wasn't happy. And I think for the reasons we got into earlier, I'm not a corporate animal.
Mm.
Uh, the pandemic hit and I started writing the book. I got inspired by a friend I had met on LinkedIn. He was writing his book. I decided to start my own, and then I started to realize I can build something from this that will help people. So now, to answer long-winded way of answering that first question, I coach people through unemployment. I coach people through reemployment. I have the podcast. I talk to groups. I blog about unemployment. Write articles. I talk to women's shelters, veterans groups. I'm working with an organization that helps recovering addicts get a second chance at a career. Um, there's so many more applications to this book than I envisioned. Um,
Yeah, that's got to be incredible. That you're writing it for one particular purpose.
mhm.
And I'm assuming okay, that's who I'm writing it for. There's a good chance some other people will catch wind of it, maybe a market or a target that I didn't anticipate. But it sounds like it's gone beyond that.
It has. I just thought of it as being this book that would address things people don't normally think about when being out of work. Plus, it would be almost like a roadmap to help people in what you can do when you lose your job. Or now I have this audience that's growing of people who are afraid they might lose their job and they want to be prepared. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
you are the target audience for this, I think. And yeah, it's very gratifying that I will have people reach out to me and they found a new application for it, which is great.
Sabina, to learn a little even more about
Mhm.
you, digging into your history, what was it from your youth or your adolescence that kind of kickstarted your journey into your career? Um, Whether you thought you were going to end up fascinated with workplaces and
Mhm.
HR, what were the first couple steps? Was it family encouragement? Was it friends? Was it coincidence? Was it education? How did that path start for you?
Wow, that's a great question. Uh, I don't think a lot of little kids go around for Halloween dressed as an HR person. I
They
can't
might
imagine.
now. They might now.
I can't imagine that being a really popular costume by Hasbro or whatever. But I think for me, I always liked helping people. And that sounds super corny, uh, but making someone happy even for a minute. So a lot of my jobs were in customer service, things like that. And the other thing is, I come from a family, let's just say we're passionate and leave it at that. And so I got really good at being able to handle somebody who is in a moment of extreme passion. Let's leave it at that. But
Okay. Okay.
one of my early first jobs was I worked at a hotel. I worked the front desk at a hotel. And when you work the front desk and someone's checking out, you are blamed for everything.
Hmm.
And usually, most of the staff at that time, we were pretty young and so forth. And we would have people be angry that their room was sold or their eggs weren't cooked right or their key card didn't work. And rather than just sit there and take the abuse, I think I just got really good at talking through the problem with somebody and having them leave happy. And I think that's a trademark in my career.
Hmm.
I looked at HR that way. I looked at going into corporate learning in that respect. I think that served me very well. So when I wrote this book, the idea was anytime I learned something new, it was without a doubt a journey that cost me time or money. And when you're out of work, those are two things you can't spare.
Hmm.
And I didn't want anyone else to have to struggle like I did. And I'll give an example. A lot of people who maybe are white collar who lose their job hesitate to take unemployment insurance. That's your pay. They also hesitate to look into things like their healthcare benefits or they're called SNAP benefits, but
Hmm.
people might know them as food stamps, your nutritional benefits. And I was in that group. I kept thinking, oh, I can't take unemployment pay because other people need it more than me. I don't want to take their money. It doesn't work that way. Anybody who's worked is entitled to it. Snap was this eye opener for me because things got really, really desperate. And I was Googling, like, help. And I got this thing of, like, your SNAP benefits. Have you investigated those? And I'm like, no, I have not. And I went down to the office in my city and I applied and I qualified. And it was over $300 a month for food, which that was great. But it also, I could have had it much earlier. That $300 I was paying out of my savings account or my unemployment pay could have been going for a car payment or education to get another job, things like that. So it's really important that people know what's available to them and how to leverage it for success while they're out of work so that you can focus on things like rebuilding your confidence, looking for that dream career, all of those things. You don't have to worry so much about getting by every day.
Yeah. I love that you bring up the fact that you worked at a hotel. I did that too. And I've always said, and I've written about how, yeah, I've gone to school, got a couple degrees, but that for me, what set the bar for me in terms of how I produce for others, how I deal with others, how I work with clients or whoever it may be, were those for me like blue collar jobs of working in a factory with my parents, then working in a hotel, like that frontline customer service, quality control kind of environment. Um, so it's amazing. That's just another example where, yeah, education is great, memorizing things is great, but those kind of environments kind of, you're forged by fire. You're thrown into the fire when you're that young and
Yeah.
you have to put
You're
something out.
responsible.
Yeah, somebody's mad, you're the face they see, therefore you are the organization and they're going to let you know it.
A couple things like you mentioned earlier, these, life skills that you pick up. When you have a job at that level, you learn those life skills, like mine of being able to soothe somebody and being able to problem solve. Uh, those are two skills that are in massive demand right now.
Mhm.
And they're transferable. You don't have to work in the industry that wants them. You bring that skill with you, which a
Yeah.
lot of people, I think, are starting to realize. A lot of employers are starting to realize it. But the other thing, when you work in an environment like that, I'm going to say, if you work for a larger company, like the last company I left had 80,000 employees globally. It was a behemoth. When you work in something like a hotel, a restaurant, you see how every department is really interdependent on every other department to do their job. I think there's more of that kind of camaraderie, that understanding of how the whole ecosystem works.
Mm. Yeah.
And to your first question to me, I think that's really helped me in writing this book in the work that I do. When you're out of work, it's not just getting the job back. It is rebuilding your self-esteem. It's keeping your financial self as whole as possible and then recovering from that. Nothing exists in its own silo. And I think that mirrors people. There's not just one facet of you, right? And all of those things that, all those pillars of self-care need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Not all at once, and it'll
Yeah.
shift the balance and the amount, but you have to keep everything running as well as possible at all times. Having a training ground like a hotel or, a job that's like where you're the frontline employee, I think you have an understanding and respect for that not everybody gets.
Yeah. I think the word that stands out that you used is ecosystem.
Mhm.
The dependence on or the dependence from other people, when you're working with them and you see what goes into you delivering for your
Yeah.
position, your results, your bottom line. So and I think it's a bit humbling when you see that, when you see really what goes into it, who are the faces that are making you shine as the representative. They're providing everything behind you. You may be dealing with the customer, but it's so and so that has to run up to their room or run out to wherever that they need to solve that problem. So I think, yeah, ecosystem is such a great word to use. So
So
was
you're no longer the sun now, you are part of the solar system.
mm,
You can
exactly,
get it that way.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that plays into that plays into the book that we mentioned before we started recording, The Courage to
Yeah.
Be Disliked, where I'm reading it now and it gets to the part where I'm generalizing it, I'm paraphrasing, but there's an importance for your own value that instead of keeping things vertical where it's like somebody's saying good job, that means if you're saying good job to somebody, it means like you think you're better than them, which is, please read the book. It's great. I may be butchering it, but that there's something to the horizontal relationship where you're saying thank you. So no one has the upper hand. You're just kind of building each other up in the environment. So that stands out in those particular roles because there's so many people like in the blue collar field or industry, whatever it may be, whatever field it may be, where they get so much done, but they don't get the respect that they deserve. But in any case, so where did you go after? How old were you about during your work in the hotel?
I was in college. I'd
Okay, what'd you go to
actually
school for?
Oh, so this is great. You asked, like, how did college maybe impact what I currently do? I was a philosophy major.
Okay.
You're not gonna get rich with that. It's a very and I went to a very unique school, and what I appreciate, it's really about as pure a liberal arts program as you can get, and I think that ties back into working at a hotel or seeing that ecosystem because the liberal arts educates you in this way of you having a little bit of everything. So there's like an appreciation for it and an understanding that I was actually with someone I went to school with last night, and we were talking about we were forced to do things that were out of our comfort zone. So I'm thinking like if you were a big science jock in high school, you go to a science college and you get an engineering degree, a physics degree. When you become a liberal arts student, there's nowhere to hide. Like you can't rely on the thing you're best at. You can't
Hmm.
stay in the humanities or in music or something like that. You're forced to learn everything. And there's also something that comes with maybe not mastering, but maybe meeting the challenge of a topic you probably weren't comfortable with. And it's that I think being comfortable with being uncomfortable that
Yeah.
I learned from school very well. I was uncomfortable the entire time I was there. But I go back and it helped me be able to handle the unknown very well and realize that, okay, the worst thing about the unknown is it's unknown. Therefore, I want to know what it is to take any fear out of it and to understand it. And maybe this will be something I really like or can do. And I would say that this sounds so silly, but mastering calculus in college really helped me see that. I was not a
Mm.
math person. I did really well in that topic. Um, and
I feel triggered. I did horrible at calculus. I was amazing at math. As soon as there were more shapes than fucking numbers, I'm like I'm over
so
this. I can't.
the college I went to is St. John's College in Annapolis. We have a sister campus in Santa Fe, same school. And it's very unique because there are no textbooks. Instead, you take what are called the great works of the Western world and you use those as your textbooks. So you don't read a textbook on religion, you read the Bible or Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther. One of the unique things we do is we study Ptolemy. And if you know anything about Ptolemy, which most people don't, Ptolemy mathematically proved that the Earth was the center of the solar system.
Mhm.
You can't dispute math, right? It works out. We know that it is not the center of the solar system,
Mhm.
but for centuries that was the belief because he mathematically proved it. It showed you that first of all, this impossible thing I've proven mathematically. You can't argue with math, um, but that it is this thing of even when it's so right, it can be wrong. It's something that uh, you can take the simplest idea and flip it around and change it and actually convince people for centuries that it is the truth, but also that you can do all that, you can mathematically prove it, and you're still wrong.
Mhm.
And it teaches you to be so open-minded. And I think that was one of the things I took away from college and I bring to the workplace is understanding it takes conversation, it takes applying the work, hearing different opinions, then determining things for myself. But always be open-minded that whatever you thought could change immediately.
So what made you if I heard you right, major in philosophy, and I'm not judging at all.
Mhm.
Major in philosophy, go to this liberal arts school. What was it that kind of crafted your mind in that direction?
To go to that school, it was I went to my most trusted teacher in high school and said, "I need ideas for college. What do you suggest?" And he suggested it to me. He said, "Based on knowing you, I think this is where you should go." And he was right. Um, and I liked it that I was going to go to grad school, and it was a great foundation for graduate school. So it just worked out perfectly.
Where'd you go to grad school?
Where? Or for
Yeah,
what? I
or
I
both.
actually was one of the, like, fledgling students for Walden University,
Okay.
and why I picked it, at that time, it was very odd that you didn't have 2 years and endless income to go to grad school. I a colleague of mine who is pretty advanced in her career, we both went there at separate times, and we had a conversation about, remember when people questioned the validity of this and now everybody's online in education and we were such trendsetters? But I picked Walden because I wanted to study psychology. They had a very flexible program. And then my first semester, I took a Psych 101 course and discovered the world of industrial organizational
Mm-hmm.
psychology, which is the workplace, and didn't look back. That was it for me.
So what did your career look like after school?
After school, I actually ended up working on a political campaign, and when that ended, one of the donors was starting his own business in his garage and liked the way I managed the volunteer group, asked if I wanted a job, and as the company built, I was the one who's like, "Hey, could we maybe have insurance? Should we be filing payroll taxes?" And that all fell to me, and so I became the HR person. And as the
Okay.
company grew, my role grew, and then it got sold off to a British company, and I found myself out of work. I I'd left work because I had a family member who was ill, my mother, and I took care of my mother until she passed. And then I was trying to find a job in HR, and that wasn't happening. I ended up working for a company where I studied total quality management, which is, think of it as an efficiency expert.
Hmm.
When that job drew to a close, they kept me and asked me to manage their call center, which is a very unique environment. It is a very hard environment to manage and work in. People have very complicated lives. They face challenges most people can't even understand. Getting to work is one of the hardest things for people who take these jobs because they're usually single parents. They usually don't have a degree, sometimes not even high school, and they want to do good, solid work to take care of their families. And that's a challenge for them sometimes. So it was a very unique environment. It can wear you down pretty quickly. I was still trying to get back into HR. This is a good story, so bear with me. I know I'm being long-winded, but I got a company called Magellan Health, national company, reached out to interview me for HR. I didn't get that job. The recruiter and I hit it off. She found another job for me because she liked me. I didn't get that job. Over a year later, I come home one night. There's a message that I get this really lovely voice saying, like, "Do you remember me from Magellan? I remember you. We have a job. I think it would be great for you." I called her the next day, and it was in corporate learning. And I told her, like, I know nothing about this. And getting back to what you were talking about skills, she said, we can teach you that.
Mm.
You have things we can't teach. You're a good communicator. People remember you. You're engaging. These are all things we need in someone in learning. I think this is your job. There's no argument. Come meet the vice president of learning. Within 2 weeks, I was working there. And I think about this recruiter almost every day because she changed my life for the better. She saw something in me. When I've hired people, I've tried to use that philosophy. I use it when I coach people, when I talk to corporations, of looking beyond that resume, going beyond the surface. It was a life lesson and it changed my life.
Yeah, it's amazing to come across those people that, you may go
Yeah.
into a situation, you're interviewed or you meet somebody from HR, the script is, I go in, put my suit on, I go in, they ask a question, I answer, I leave. Do they want me back for another interview? Do I hear back from them? And end scene, right? But then
Mhm.
every once in a while, you come across these people that they step out of their roles. They step out of their role, meaning it could have been easy where she just asked you the questions, you didn't get
Yeah.
the job, okay, peace. But every once in a while, there are those people that go above and beyond their positions and just kind of stand out and remember people and make these life-changing decisions and or calls.
I think we need more hiring managers and recruiters like Margaret.
Shout out to Margaret.
I know, Margaret, you're awesome. But I also think we need to do that for ourselves. And I think a weird specialty of mine is I ask people to do this when they're out of work. Look at this as this opportunity to do something you want to do or what you've always wanted to do. Odds are you have that base skill set because we always do things we like and we're good at. And without even knowing it, you could have acquired most of these skills. And it's a matter of repackaging and branding yourself. And I hate talk like that, but nothing else fits. And putting yourself out there as this person who, again, don't market yourself as the profession or industry you had, but as the person with the skills,
Mhm.
because you never lose those skills. And that's how you need to put yourself out there to maybe get that job that's aligned with your values and your dreams. Um, so,
So does that lead up to where you are now, Sabina?
in an odd way, I never thought I'd be doing this. Um, I I like security, the steady paycheck, the idea of
Mhm.
benefits, things like that. But I often tell people I don't know if I've ever been happier professionally than I've been in the past couple of years because I get to help other people. I feel like I add value every day. I'm doing things that I genuinely like. I mean, there's a lot that goes to this that I hate. Like, I'm sure you and I could talk for hours about creating content or, the things of our job that we don't necessarily enjoy. But then I get to do things like come on the podcast with you. I get to take somebody who maybe is questioning themselves and doubting themselves and help them find a career where they feel fulfilled. I give them hope.
Mhm.
I help them see a version of themselves that I see. Uh,
Yes.
and that I think is really important. I'm not trying to make too much of my own role, but I think how
No, no,
many of us
no.
would have done something differently if someone had just pulled us aside one day and said, you have a tremendous amount of potential. And
A
sometimes that's all
Margaret.
it takes.
Everybody needs a Margaret. Or
Yeah,
be a Margaret for other people. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. But be your own Margaret.
yes, yes, absolutely. Um, yeah. And I know that's an important message of your work is first and foremost, be your own Margaret. She's gonna like trademark her name in this capacity, but I think that's key too, is just
Yeah.
the same kind of ripple effect or the same kind of impact you want to have for yourself about giving yourself that grace, giving yourself that respect, giving yourself
Mhm.
that credit. I think as powerful as that is for you, just as powerful as just seeing it in others and just commenting and sharing what you see in others, not just the passive, how you doing, great job, tell me about your day, this was my day, but like really looking someone in the eye and telling them what they're good at.
Yeah.
I've mentioned before on here that I think once I started going back out and socializing or going seeing people at work, the relationships were changed because again, you didn't know when the next time was that you would see this person. You knew what
Mhm.
happened in March 2020. You thought you were going home for 2 weeks, and some people you didn't see in person for 2.5, 3 years. So it's powerful just to give somebody a little insight into what you see about them, not about what they just completed, a project, a role, a mission, whatever it may be. Yes, obviously those two.
Mhm.
But when there's nothing on the line, just pausing, stopping, looking at somebody and telling them what they're good at, not scripted when it feels right, when it's authentic, but letting people know
Yeah.
the greatness that you see in them. It's just, I don't know, it's just very, very important. And I think it just makes all the difference for just kind of creating this ripple effect through your community and into society, like these small little um just yeah, impacts that you can make in your daily life and
And
work.
these are things that don't cost you anything, expressing your gratitude and appreciation of another person. One of the things I tell people, I get asked all the time, like, what do I do when I'm depressed and I'm out of work? One of my first responses is do something for someone else.
Mm,
It gets you out of yourself. You feel good because you've helped another person. They've expressed gratitude, hopefully, and you understand you add value. And that's we all add value. And it's important to know that I hope we're getting past just identifying ourselves by our professions and our jobs.
yeah. Yeah.
That's a hard thing for Americans.
Yeah. Yeah. That's and again, going back to that book that I'm reading, The Courage to Be Disliked, it speaks about that. Where
Mhm.
and people out here have spoken about that as well, where your identity comes from solely from the work that you're doing, where it's kind of like you got to hedge your bets, give 100%, but not tie it solely to that particular environment or that particular person. If it's a relationship, you know, again, hedging those bets, having that, not putting all your eggs in one basket, if you will. But yeah, that's key. So, Sabina, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing, even though this is not what
Oh,
you intended to be? Does it make sense that this is what you're doing?
absolutely not. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted, but no. And I kind of write
Not
about
even a little.
well, I don't know. I mean, if you want to like get out the shrink couch and talk to me about this, we might have different answers, but I write about this in the book. So my I had a parent, my father, who was unemployed for a living. He would get a job, he abused the system. He would get a job, work it long enough to collect unemployment, do something to get fired, and it was very uncomfortable to be around. We were never allowed to talk about it as kids, so we never talked about those difficult things that you need to talk about when your family is facing something like being out of work. Uh, I always swore I would never take advantage of the system. I would never use anything the system had to offer me for that reason. I, of course, went back on that. I needed that assistance, that aid. I did not abuse it, but it when I was writing the book, there were a few echoes of childhood, uh, but I don't. The book definitely did not come out of it. It came out of my own experience. It was just like, oh yeah, that did happen. Interesting. You
Yeah.
always make these correlations.
Yeah. Sabina, what does leadership mean to you?
Oh, that's
I
a
think
good
this is a
one.
good one for you just because of going from the corporate to,
Yeah.
being an entrepreneur to helping people. So, what does leadership mean to you? What is that? What makes good leadership? Great leadership.
So leadership is incredibly important to me, having worked in it, taught it, lived it for at least 10 years, if not more. That was always my specialty in the corporate world, was leadership development. I think the easiest answer I can give you is Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And I really do believe that. I think when you're a leader, there is a certain sacrifice you make where your team comes first, taking care of your team, developing them, making sure they have everything that they need, being their advocate. I do believe you become an agent for the organization. I'm not immune to that. It's probably one of the hardest jobs to have, where you're kind of in that balancing act of being the agent of the organization, having the responsibility for your team. And it's lonely. It can be very isolating. So you also have to take very good care of yourself. It's a very difficult role to have. But I do overall think that for me, responsibility is the key word for being a leader, in that maybe stepping back multiple times a day and saying, what is my major responsibility in this situation? Am I mitigating risk for my organization, or am I supporting and coaching a team member as they need it? I think that mindfulness is what sets really great leaders apart from people who like the title, like the paycheck, but not that responsibility. Maybe the harder aspects of the job.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Now we can jump into the book. You've alluded to the book. You've talked about
Mhm.
kind of the background of where the book came from. Can you, I guess, formally introduce the book and tell us a
Sure.
little more about maybe what was the trigger for actually where you actually decided to write the book? What was that process like? What can we find in the book?
Yeah, lots of questions there. So as I said, I very jokingly, very sarcastically would say to people I knew, whenever I would learn something like, oh, wait, I get free education. And I'd be like, why doesn't anyone tell you this? There ought to be a book. I'm going to write a book. And it would morph to that. It became a joke. And then I got a job, a much better job than the one I lost. And I'll be honest, it definitely was not as important to me. I was like, I don't care. I have a job now. Helping other people, not so much high on my priority list. And it was a great job, and I didn't enjoy it. And I didn't know why I didn't enjoy it. And I had gotten a connection on LinkedIn with someone named Andy Storch. And I didn't know Andy. And I only accept connections if we have mutual connections or something like that. He and I had none of that. I don't know why I accepted, but I did. And so Andy and I were connected on LinkedIn. And at work, we were sent home because of the pandemic. We were sent home in the middle of the day, like, a snow day, like your kid in school. And I found myself home at 2 PM, which never happened. And I got a ping on my phone saying, Andy's podcast is live. And he was interviewing his book coach and talking about his book. His book coach, Henri Corder, basically feels everyone has a book in them and you should write a book. And both of them were very infectious, likable in this podcast. And I started writing that night. And I reached out to Andy and said, hey, you inspired me. He was incredibly supportive. He got Honore to help me. Both of them from the sidelines were incredibly supportive. They were cheerleaders. And then I realized with the pandemic, there was a need for this book. And I thought, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do now. And that was, it's that simple.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that simple, but you were going kind of back and forth with it.
Yeah.
But it just all came together with that kind of coincidental hearing of the podcast.
I think when the moment's right, like I work with a lot of people now who are writing books, and people who want to write books will reach out to me. And it happens when it happens. There's no good time. There's no bad time. You have to make the decision of, yeah, I'm doing this right now. And no amount of coaching, if you're not there, It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I
So
was there.
Sabina, as an overview, what kind of path then do you take the reader on? Because I know you talk about like
Yeah.
the mindset of someone that's out of work. You also talk about workplace policies, unemployment policies. So how is it that you guide the reader through the message you want to deliver for them? How do you organize it for them?
Yeah. This was not the initial aim of the book, but there's the kind of, I call it the administrative component of your assistance programs, things you need to do for life, like get your household budget together, get your money together, your health care, all of that, your household.
Hmm.
And then there's this psychological element of how being out of work impacts us emotionally. There's a term called enmeshment, where you overly identify with something. A lot of us overly identify with our work, and that leads to it can lead to a lot of unhealthy habits, the worst of which is putting yourself last and putting a job first. And this is what I had done in the job that I lost. I put the job first to my own detriment. Then when I lost the job, I had to face the healthcare issues I experienced from it, the neglect of loved ones, uh, disorganization in my home, all of those things. Uh, and then I had no job either. So you need to make sure that you are taken care of holistically. But then I'd written the book like that, and people who read it said, well, it's okay, but it's kind of boring. Then I added my own story into it, and everyone's like, now you're talking. So I share pretty openly what I went through of just that feeling of being dismissed and feeling like, this big. Um, and there was a moment where I'm waiting out front. I've got all of my things in bags, and employees are coming in, so everyone knows what's happened to me. And that was embarrassing enough. But then hearing my HR person and my former boss argue over whether or not they're going to pay for an Uber or a Lyft to take me back home
Huh.
because I had taken a commuter bus in. I had no way home.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this is great. Um, you know, but then I had early wins after I lost my job. I was interviewing with some very, very top companies. And when it came to nothing after about 6 months, then it really hit me. And I went into an awful depression. And I had to pull myself out of it. Luckily, I had some loved ones who really helped me. And I share what kind of got me out of that place because it was really bad. And we don't like to talk about that because it's very uncomfortable and it hits very close to home. Overwhelmingly, and this is more on the podcast, sometimes from the book, people reach out and say, okay, I thought it was just me. I
Mm.
thought I was the only one who went through that. I'm like, oh no, I have lists of people who've gone through that. And I think we should talk about it because I do think it's normal, but it's also recoverable. And people need to know that. I think you do need to give a talk about grieving the loss of your job and how to deal with that. I get a great response to that because people don't realize they should do that as a way to move forward. Usually we move forward with these revenge fantasies or anger, and that's what fuels us.
Yeah.
If you put that to bed in a healthy way and learn from it, you are much better suited for the future. And you're least likely to experience trauma. And when you start a new job, that can be your focus rather than recovering from the prior trauma.
Yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said about obstacles, excuse me, obstacles we go through where
Yeah.
the biggest hit is that mindset that we're the only ones going through it.
Oh, no matter how much family, friends you have, no matter how supportive they are, no matter how much money you have in your bank account, being out of work is so isolating. I think because I'm very proud of the career that I constructed. And to question that and wonder, was I doing the right thing? What did I do wrong? 99% of the time when someone loses their job, they have done nothing wrong. Shame is described as feeling bad about something inappropriate that you have done. The first word most people use to describe being out of work to me is shame. And I instantly come back with what do you think you did wrong in the workplace? And if they say anything, it's always this: I should have worked harder. I should have put more into it. And it's like, could you really have done that?
Yeah.
And usually it's a lot of talking with people when they're like, no, I was working 60 hours a week. I was exhausted. I'm like, there you go.
Yeah.
There was nothing else you could have done. It is not you. It is a business decision.
Yeah, I think in thinking about what you could have done, what else you could have done, that kind of
Mhm.
mentality, I think you have to find peace in the fact that you did everything you could,
Yeah.
and then you got to detach from the result, because as long as you put everything into it and it didn't work out, I mean, that's beyond your control. And that's
So
what
let's,
drives us crazy, is that anxiety of
yeah.
wanting to control everything, but there's only a limited amount of anything that we can control, no matter if it's home life, relationships, work.
So let's flip that a little, though. Instead of saying everything like you could have done, how about everything that you wanted to do?
Of course.
You know, because sometimes if you lose your job, chances are there's issues in your workplace that they've had to make staff cuts. That tends to lead to a very difficult, if not toxic, environment. And that carries over to the individual. You go into that every day. Even if you work remotely, you feel it. And there's only so much investment you should be putting into that, because we spend more time at work than anywhere else.
Yeah.
You deserve to have, I wouldn't necessarily say enjoyable work atmosphere, because it's work. You should maybe get certain kind of pleasure or fulfillment out of work, but it certainly shouldn't be something that causes you medical issues, be it
Hmm.
psychological, physical, um, that makes you, you know, the Sunday scaries, as we call them,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Then you need to look for another job. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Sabina, what can you just go through? I don't know how you might have broken up the book, maybe in
Mhm.
sections and then chapters within that, but can you give like some of the titles that people might find in there in that path through the book?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here thinking, and I am not sure I actually titled chapters. Um, isn't that awful that I don't know that? But I do think yes, I did title them. How embarrassing. As
No,
as
not
I
at all.
reach
Not at
behind
all.
me and check. Uh, but what I tried to do is try to write it in two ways. One was like a chronological order of, you've lost your job today, get this book and start following it immediately. But also, let's just say you've been out of work for a while and you find the book, you can flip to a section that relates to where you are right now. Like maybe your primary issue is healthcare. I have a chapter on that and how you can use the Affordable Health Care Act and make sure that you're covered. Or maybe you're struggling with motivation. For me, motivation and depression were huge issues. I found creating a routine that included self-care and professional development was the thing that started to motivate me. Uh, but then I also, let's look at it as this story of getting another job. And I have a whole section on networking, your resume, interview, um, interview prep, and how to handle after an interview and negotiation. I think my favorite section is how to go back to work. We don't think about that. We think, oh, I'm just going to go back to work and everything's going to be fine. No, uh, a couple of things. You need to prepare and end the unemployment phase of your life and start the reemployment phase. And that actually takes some strategy and thought. Returning to work is one of the most exhausting things you can do. You go from being home all day, or maybe you even have a part-time job, Now you're in a new job where you're trying to prove yourself. You're on all the time. You're trying to learn. You come home, you're too tired to make dinner, to clean, things like that. So I actually think there are ways to prepare to go back to work so that you can focus on work. And then I even have a section on, to me, losing your job is traumatic. That requires recovery. But when you're trying to survive unemployment and looking for a job, you don't have time for that. Our bodies and our minds take over and give us the energy we need, the focus we need. When you get to that calm, safe place is when that PTSD kicks in. I worked with people who've gone back to work and they come back to me and say, I don't understand it. I can't sleep at night. I'm worried all the time. I'm like, yeah, your body's catching up.
Mm.
And they're like, I should be enjoying things. I have a steady paycheck. I have benefits. Someone said to me, I can get sick now. And
Yeah.
I should be happy. I'm like, you are happy. You're just still dealing with this huge trauma that happened of losing your job. That's way out of my pay grade.
Yeah.
I can help people build resilience so it doesn't impact them as badly. But if it continues to impact you, like you have insomnia, constant worry, you might need to see a therapist. You might need to go into the EAP, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But it's something I didn't see addressed a lot that I wanted to mention to people. So,
Yeah. No, it's
so
important.
that's kind of it in a nutshell.
But I mean, listen, I was unemployed. I started working in the city in New York, January 2001, right out of college. Uh,
Mm.
September 11th happened. A month later, got laid
Hmm.
off, and I had just signed a lease for an apartment that
Yeah.
previous August. In the end, luckily, unemployment ran out right when my lease ran out, and then I ended up back in Connecticut. But and here's the thing: there's the generational thing that happened. My first job out of college,
Mm.
so the psychological impact on you, although hard, is much different than if
Hmm.
you're already an established professional. Um,
Yes.
so I've experienced it. It was a different time. I'm assuming with all the technology now and just being in each other's lives and seeing what's going on, it's a lot different now than it was then. Because if I was seeing
Absolutely.
on Facebook or whatever that my friends were all getting jobs and I couldn't find anything, that's got to take an additional toll that I can't even imagine having experienced at a young age,
Hmm.
right out of college, maybe 21, 22 years old. But a lot of what you said resonate, even though I got laid off in a different time. That was the only time I got laid off. A lot of what you said and shared today resonates with me. Again, but yeah, I didn't have that pressure of anybody else in the house that was depending on me. It was just me. But I know that there is a lot that's psychological about it that we
Hmm.
don't even consider. I love that you've said, it's important to share your story because other people are going through the same thing. And again, there's that question of the facade, making sure that you have everything in
Oh,
control, that you have to be strong and all that, societal bullshit kind of thing. But
so let me share with you. I lost my job the week before a college reunion. And I live in the same town as my alma mater. People were coming to stay with me. Few things say success, like, hey, I just lost my job. And I didn't tell anybody for the first 2 days. And then it was hey, let's stay up and talk like we did in college. And it finally came out. And of course, my friends were nothing short of supportive and helpful and everything. And I got this, why didn't you tell us sooner? And
shame.
yeah, I didn't say that. I'm like, everybody has stuff going on. I'm trying to downplay it. And even now, some friends have read the book and they were like, I had no idea you were going through that. And I'm like, well, no, of course not. People out of work do something called covering, where you pretend everything is fine. You try to keep up with everyone else. If everyone goes to brunch and spends $100 per person, you do that, even though you might not
Mm,
really have that $100. You keep appearances up. I think we don't have to do that. You're afraid that
yeah.
if you share, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, I don't have money for food, you're going to be this downer, or worse, you ask for help and no one helps you. my theory is, let's be a little transparent. This is a way you're going to weed out who should really be your friends.
Yeah.
Even if they say no, which is their right, they can still give you support. They can still give you, there's always something they can do for you. And I think we have to start being a lot more open about this.
Sabina, anytime I have an author on here, I always ask what the lessons are that you took away from writing the book. Some authors speak to the actual writing process, others speak to what they learned themselves. I ask it in a sense, and you can respond any way you want. I'm always just curious most about how your ideas about the topic, the issue that you're covering, evolve. What might have changed from the start of the book to when it was out? What is it that evolved in your mind or changed in your mind? If it is writing habits, absolutely, you can share anything you want. But I'm always curious how putting out a book has changed you.
Great question. I mentioned earlier that this is not the book I intended to write. It was just going to be kind of a how-to resource guide. I think it gains a lot by my sharing my story. I wanted, my editor used to put these notes in the introduction of like, you come off like a victim. Do you want people to see you this vulnerable? And my answer was this: hell yes. People need to know I went through what they're going through so that they understood the intent of the book, they weren't alone, and that they would get through being out of work. And I felt I needed to share that a lot, which is hard because I'm an incredibly private person. That held up my launching the book for a very long time because I didn't know if I was ready to put myself out there. So I think this whole experience has shown me that I needed to get past my own, I don't think it was insecurity so much as kind of a fear of what I was leaving myself open to. Because let's face it, social media and so forth, there's a lot of trolls out there. Things come up, and that held me back, and the desire to help people kind of finally overrode that. And I'm so glad I did. It's that thing of, I wish I'd known sooner. I would have launched it sooner and maybe helped some other people. I learned that I could write a book. That was a really big deal for me, of getting through that. It had always been a bucket list item. It definitely opened career doors. When I met with Honoré Corder, the book coach, I thought I was going into this meeting to talk about writing a book. I left this hour-long meeting, and this is the incredible magic of her, with a business. It had never dawned on me to build a business on the book. I'm very grateful for that because, again, speaking to groups, I hope to put out some courses to help people maybe figure out how to get through the different aspects of being out of work, the coaching, all of that. The podcast all came from the book. So it doesn't just have to be the book. And we're at this stage in our culture where there are different audiences for different forms of social media. I reach people in the podcast who would never buy a book. I reach people on LinkedIn who don't have time to do either. All of that. So I think casting that wide net is really crucial.
Into those different ecosystems.
Yes, there we go. Same thing, same theme. And I think for me, a lot of my friends are shocked that I do this. Not that I'm doing it, but I do like the security of the steady paycheck and so forth, and to kind of take that leap of faith on myself. That probably should have been a lot harder than it was. And I'm really surprised that, I say like some people can do this on their own. Other people need to get kicked out the door. I felt like losing my most recent job, that was me getting kicked out the door to do this on my own. But I already had an exit strategy in mind. I was already moving towards it. I like to think I would have followed through. So I think that's probably the ultimate comfortable with my discomfort zone that I'm in is like every day.
Yeah.
Um,
It's reminiscent of the pandemic where it's
yeah.
something out of your control that just kind of expedites something that was already in motion, kind of thing.
And there are these moments where I'm like, oh, should I go back to, corporate world and so forth? Because it's very safe and nice there in some ways. And then something will happen that affirms, like, yeah, I made the right decision, which is always nice.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Mhm.
Sabina, now that we've covered your book, as we were corresponding back and forth, you had mentioned a list of books that you wanted to
Yeah.
just mention that you say helped you throughout your process when you were unemployed. Can we go through each of those? I don't know if you have the list. If not, I have the list up.
I have it in my head, but if you have it in front of you, and yeah, it seems appropriate since this is like, book talk. Um,
Absolutely. The first book on your list is Creating Your Best Life, The Ultimate Life List Guide by Michael B. Firsch and Caroline Adams Miller.
so this is funny. It's one of those books that you see it in the bookstore and you buy it because it looks like, oh yeah, I should do that. And then it sits on your shelf forever, untouched. That's what happened with me. When I lost my job, I thought, hey, this would be a great book to help me through unemployment. And like a good doobie, I read the first chapter and then didn't touch it. So fast forward 6 months later, when I'm in a pretty bad place and I need structure, I turned to this book very unintentionally. It was just like, okay, I need something to do. Let's read books. And it happened to be, I don't know whether it was on a nightstand or what, but I picked it back up. And it's a phenomenal book. It's how to, I think a lot of us are really good at writing down goals. And then we're shocked when they don't come to fruition because, we wrote it down. Why has nothing happened? I wrote it down in my diary. No, this book focuses on how to achieve. And it gives you things that are based on scientific fact and that have been proven to help you actually achieve your goals. Not in how you write them, but in the actions that you take, the environment you set up for yourself, aligning with your goals, things like that. I still go back to it. It's one of those books that you can just take a chapter and do it, or you can go through the whole book. I always find something new in it. I can't say enough about it.
The next one is The Bullet Journal Method, Track the Past, Order the Present, and Design the Future by
Yeah.
Ryder Carroll.
Yeah. That one surprised me. I'm a consummate list maker, and unfortunately, I have that bad habit of the list just keeps getting longer and longer, and
Then there are lists of lists.
yeah, and then you get to this point of desperation where you put things down on your list of things to do, like shower, just so you can scratch something off and feel accomplished. And I discovered bullet journaling as a way of like tracking really good habits. It's a way of being creative. So people take it to an extreme. Their bullet journals look like these works of art where they track everything from like how many steps do you walk a day to how many glasses of water you drink to how much money you're saving. And now you'll see things on like TikTok is like things like the money challenge. They're almost like these living bullet journals because you check in daily and you do these tasks. And bullet journaling shows you progress where the to-do list does not. And it's progress over time. And I found that so helpful to me when I was out of work because I was actually every day working towards something. And I would look at the bullet list on my refrigerator and feel really good about myself.
Yeah. The next one, Start with Why, How Great Leaders
Oh,
Inspire Everyone to Take Action by Simon Sinek.
what a great book. Seriously. There's a school of thought that you are at your best at work when you combine passion and purpose. And there's another good book that I don't think I put on the list called Great at Work that talks a lot about that. But Simon Sinek uh, tells these wonderful stories. Like he has a great TED Talk on YouTube where having passion is almost this way of guaranteeing success. And And he tells this great story about the Wright brothers and their main competitor, and who had everything they didn't, including money and the backing of the federal government. And yet I can't remember this person's name. We all know the Wright brothers. And what the Wright brothers had was that passion. And they knew their why, as Simon would say. And I find it incredibly helpful. I go back to it. I will listen to parts of his TED Talks or the audio on it to kind of get a pep talk. Ironically, right before the pandemic, the last social thing I did was go to listen to Simon Sinek speak in DC. And I'm like, what a way to kick off the pandemic.
Keep you
So,
motivated.
yes.
The next one, The Artist's Way, and I'm
Oh,
assuming it's a separate book, The
yeah.
Artist's Way at Work by Julie Cameron.
Yeah. These books are fascinating. If you don't think you're creative, these books are a way of kind of finding your inner artist and not caring what anyone else thinks about them, not wanting to be liked, and a way to bring creativity to your daily life and then bringing that to work. It was a nice way of kind of learning new skill, but also being able to look at how do I want to carry that into my future work. Found it so helpful and fun.
The next one, You Must Write a Book, Honoree Cordair.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned her. She
Mhm.
was your book coach.
Yeah, that's actually free on her website. And it's, if you don't know where to start, it gives you a great outline. I will say this, when you're out of work, you have more time than you will ever have any other time being constructive, doing something you've always wanted to do, like write a book. You don't have to finish it. No one else has to know about it, but it actually is a way of keeping busy, of centering thoughts. And she gives some very practical advice. Definitely a key book.
And the last one on your list, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor
No.
Frankl.
Yeah. Before this interview, I was thinking about it because you had said you wanted to talk about books. I don't know if you've ever read the Frankl or not.
Yeah, I did. I got it right
Yeah,
here.
so you can agree with me. I'm going to say this. When you're not just out of work, but there are times if you have depression, anxiety, there can be triggers for it. So this is a book I would say proceed with caution, because it's written, Frankl wrote this about his experiences when he was in a concentration camp. And he talks about that. So that can be very hard to read. I'm actually part of a book group where we read this every year and discuss it at the end of the year. And there have been times where some of us have said, really can't do it right now. The takeaway from the book, if you persevere, is Frankl found out that he discovered in the camp that anybody who was able to put meaning to their life, finding the thing that they live for, was the thing that sustained them and helped them absorb tremendous tragedy, but also to move forward with life. I think that's something we should all work on in various doses. It could be your family. It could be your education. It's called logotherapy. And it's one of those things when you are wondering what's the point, what's the use, even just being able to find something that gets you through the day can be so important and show you there is a reason for all of this. When I look back now at being out of work, and there were times where it got really bad, and I would wonder, like, what is the purpose and point of this? I look back from this point, I go, right now, what I'm doing was the reason. Like, if there was a reason I was out of work, it was to write this book and help other people. And I'm not saying that to sound immodest, but I did want to get out of the experience being able to help others. And I thought it would be going back to work. I didn't know it would be the book. But I think if anyone who's ever questioning themselves digs in and taps down to what is the thing I live for? What is the thing that gives me joy, pleasure, motivation? and start to tap into that, it is a way of handling those feelings
Yeah.
that almost puts them to bed.
Yeah. With that same kind of warning you gave for what, the basis of the material, his experience in the concentration
Mhm.
camps, I highly recommend the book.
Yeah.
I think it should be required reading, like whatever the age level is that it would be appropriate for. I mean, for me,
Hmm.
I think I read Night by Ellie Wiesel in high
Oh,
school. So I mean, if we were
yeah.
reading that, I don't know if they're still reading that in high school, but this is just it has that same um tragedy of Night.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, I mean, as I was reading his book, it's amazing how he describes what everybody's going through, the losses that he had,
Hmm.
and how people were suffering aside from the physical, just in pain, not knowing what was coming. They, wondering what happened to their loved ones. And he just he'd gone through the same thing, but he kind of learned this calm just by doing exactly what you said.
Well,
Um,
and the irony is what got him through his days in the camp were helping his fellow prisoners tap into their
yeah,
meaning.
yeah,
And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I tell people, like, one of my little sayings is, instead of something happening to you, maybe it's happening for you.
yeah,
And I firmly believe my being out of work was a reflection of that. I have known people who have faced tragedy, and it's a delicate topic, but what do you want to come out of that? Because you don't control the tragedy, unfortunately. The payoff is you control what good you bring out of it, what you
mhm,
find in it, be it an awareness organization, be it how you approach the next level of your career, how your family lives. I have a client who had a great job in the C suite. She lost it. She and her family had to go through quite a lot. They were very overextended. She's now a school teacher and she's never been happier, but her family had to downsize, rearrange how they did everything. But she said the difference is they now act like a family instead of people sharing a house. And she thinks that's why it happened to her, was she was in the wrong career. Everybody in her family was miserable. She and her wife were on the verge of divorce, and now she's like, I don't even recognize us anymore, and I'm so glad. So you have to think about, what am I gonna you have to find a positive and tap into it. And it might not be the first thing you think of. You might have to play around with that,
mhm.
but how to move forward.
Yeah, and I think that kind of message plays into what you've shared, where despite what's going on in your life, losing your job, being between jobs, what is it that's going to keep you going? And it
Yeah.
sounds hokey, it sounds cliche, but I think it's cliche if you just say it in
Hmm.
one sentence, one phrase, and leave it at that. But I think we've talked about so many different examples. You've shared so many different examples of finding meaning and moving forward. I think we underestimate how much meaning comes from the internal, from
Yeah.
inside of us. Where I think we're brought up in society to look at, whether it's materialism, capitalistic stuff, who's got what can you show other people. It's such like an external from the outside um, bringing up, I guess, uh, that we spend our entire lives getting to this point where it happens to you, it happens to me, and we realize, much of like that book, The Courage to Be Disliked, it's not what comes from the outside, but what you give from the inside. Again, sounds hokey as hell, but I've had so many conversations on here with people, with guests, where they go through that lesson, they live that lesson, and it actually plays out.
See, I
Um,
don't think you're sounding hokey. I think you're sounding
nah,
very empowering,
no, I
because
know.
it's the, you know, if you're trying to control something that you will never be able to control, you're
Yeah,
going to be disappointed.
yeah,
I feel like people are waking up realizing how much control they have over their lives. You're not just a pawn. You are
Yeah.
actually, the queen is the chess piece that gets to move every which way. You really are that chess piece.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, to me, I'll sound hokey now. I equate it back to the Wizard of Oz,
Oh,
where
you're just trying to top me here, huh?
I am, where Glinda, like, you had the power all along.
Yeah.
And like, there's a point in time where you're like, wait a minute, what, why? And we do have to learn this. We can't, someone can tell us a million times.
Yes.
It
Yeah, I
makes
said that
no
before
dent
too.
whatsoever. Everyone gets mad at Glinda, like, why didn't you tell Dorothy this at the beginning of the movie? And it's like, she would have never gotten it. She
Mm,
had to learn it on her own. People need to learn it on their own.
exactly. Because you could have somebody that's younger in high school listen to our conversation, and they'd be like, "What are these old bats talking about?" Like, uh, even if you don't just say to them, it's in the inside. It's the
Hmm.
power within you. Even if you don't just leave it at that hokey sentence, but you go into the examples that we give, your mind, it's like it's just not open to that. It's like it can't register the urgency until you actually go through it. And that's just another example of being forged by fire. Like the hardship is going to test where your limit is. Your failure, I don't like the word failure, but your failure, how far you drop, it's going to show you the foundation that you can then build from.
Yeah. I, the way I look at it and the way I kind of phrase it to students I work with is, do you want to be a participant in your life, or do you want to be the driver?
Mm,
And that seems to resonate a bit. Uh, and I do think it is something people have to learn on their own. But if you are at least open to the message and you've made the decision of, no, I want to be the controller of my destiny. I had a student I worked with last year who had their future set. They were going to go to med school. They had this great work history of working at the local hospital, working the emergency room. They even contributed to a journal article. They were all set for med school. In the pandemic, he realized, if I go to med school, I won't have any life. I haven't had a quality of life in the past 2 years because of the pandemic. I don't want that. I want to have this well-rounded life, and I do want to have control. Uh, we got him a job, which was great. And just last week, he announced on LinkedIn he started his own company. And I could not be prouder.
mm.
And I thought, I went back, I'm like, I wish I'd had that courage at that age, and it took me this long.
Yeah.
So we
There's
all
so
learn
many
it at
there's
our
so
own
many
pace.
circumstances that go into it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's your upbringing. That's why I always ask that question when you start off your career. What was it that put you on that path? Was it your parents, your friends, other circumstances like serendipity, happenstance, coincidence? What was it? Just because we all have that our own mix of factors that's gonna play into how we get started and which way we go. Um,
So
you know,
I would say, to answer that again, I mean, I was taught to have a job and be grateful for it.
exactly.
And I think I progressed largely through accident, and maybe sometimes a desire for a better title, more money, a different company, things like that. I was not, I didn't set out to do it. It just kind of happened. I worked hard. Uh, I was lucky in a lot of ways. I think I had to lose it all, to maybe come back to this thing of, you know, maybe there's something else I'm meant for, something I'm really good at that I'm not doing that I need to take control of.
Yeah. So, in the same spirit of these books and what they did for you, what do you hope somebody says about your book? What do you hope they take away from your book? In that same kind of breakdown you gave of these books, what do you hope they take away from yours?
Yeah. First, I hope it helps someone on even just that transactional level of some things they can do a little differently in unemployment, to maybe consider benefits they wouldn't have before, to understand the interview process, anything like that. That would be great. to say that it's helped them get through a bad time, I would not wish a bad time on anybody, but if they're going through it, to find that somehow something I've said or written has helped them see the light or persevered, that would be just such an honor. Uh, I think in a longer term way, I want people to rethink how they look at work. That's why my company's name is Reworking. I want people to think about work differently, to realize we are the asset. You have a lot more control in your life and your destiny than you ever thought. And really the only thing different, back to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, is you had the power all along. You just have to do things and think things differently
Hmm.
in order to have that future that you want and deserve. So I think that's my purpose.
Awesome. Sabina, is there anything that I might have missed? Anything else you want to share? Anything that you're up to these days that you have upcoming that you want to share with me, this audience?
No, we've hit a lot here. So I think it's things like the podcast is out there. It's the Agile Unemployment Podcast. Any platform that you want, I think it's pretty much there. I post a lot on LinkedIn. The book is available wherever you want to buy a book. At Amazon, they do allow me to offer it for cost. So it's much cheaper there. And on Kindle Unlimited, it is actually free to read it. I understand people reading this book are out of work. Money's an issue. I wanted to make it accessible to people. So for that, the second book, hopefully coming out in the fall, still trying to buckle down and get that out. And the book tour, keep looking, like follow me on LinkedIn and you can find out about all of this stuff. John, I'm just so grateful that you had me on and we were able to talk about so much. Like we've covered a lot.
Oh yeah. Like I said, just from my experience in being laid off, knowing what the economy does, watching since then and being terrified that that was going to happen again, recognizing that when it happened to me, I was at a different point in life, and that
Yeah.
makes a huge difference. I think a lot of people just need to hear that kind of message, especially with, obviously in the last couple of months, tens of thousands of people at different organizations being laid off. Um, yeah, it's very timely, and I think the fact that your book also, in addition to the administrative, focuses on the mindset, the psychology of it. I think that's powerful, and with the world opening up and mental health coming more to the forefront
Yeah.
and being less taboo than it used to be, I think that plays also into this experience. So I appreciate that you put this book out there to help other people,
Well, thank you.
and thank you for sitting down for this conversation, Sabina.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. This has been great. I've enjoyed it immensely.
And Sabina's book is Agile Unemployment, Your Guide to Thriving While Out of Work. And if there's anything that I might have missed, didn't ask her, I was going to say we're limited on time, but we've been going for like an hour and a half. I think we could still keep going, but if there's anything that I might have missed that you want to hear about or ask about, please reach out to me. I'll reach out to Sabina, see if I can get some feedback or any kind of information she may be able to provide.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.